Hi guys, and welcome to a Hector Lecture Guide to the fight Containment Bay Z1T9. This is Zurvan Unreal. This guide is based on the currently existing Zurvan Extreme fight that's in the game right now, but at min-eye level and no echo. If there's any major or minor changes between the fight Zurvan Extreme and the Unreal version when it launches, I'll note them down in the comment section. Only thing you need to pre-agree in advance is clock spots. I recommend having tanks north-south, healers east-west, and a DPS on each intercardinal. This is going to be applicable to a mechanic later on called Soar. At the start of the fight, I recommend having your main tank go opposite the middle of the arena where the boss is, because there's cleaving autos. You just need to make sure that your main tank is facing away. These metal cutter attacks hit fairly hard, and so healers just keep an eye out on them. Tanks, you're not having any tank busters for this whole phase, so you can use your cooldowns liberally. Have everybody else stack up kind of near the southeast corner, the two-way mark on my grid. After a few auto attacks, the boss is going to make the entire east quadrant of the arena start to disappear, and also cast Flare Star, which puts puddles underneath every single player. Just move as a group to dodge your puddles, and then everybody except for the main tank can move back to where they started. The main tank has more cleaving autos, and the stage is going to crumble away one quadrant at a time. It's always in this order: east, then north, then west, then south. There's going to be one more Flare Star. This is why it's helpful to have the group stacked near 2 as opposed to 3, so that the main tank has an easier job both dodging their Flare Star and getting to the final quadrant. Otherwise, there's nothing to speak of. Once you're all in the same quadrant together, there's no more metal cutter auto attacks to worry about, the stage crumbles, and the fight actually begins. As you start off, have your main tank go north, the rest of the party slightly south, as there will start to be metal cutter autos more or less immediately. And as the boss floats down, what mechanics you see depends on what percentage the boss is at. Now, if we're going off what it was like on launch and what it's like at min-eye level no echo, you'll probably never see this, but if the boss is for some reason above 89% at this point in time, what you'll see are a bunch of metal cutter autos, followed by wave cannon. Wave cannon targets a single player with this blue marker here. That player just needs to go away from the group, so have them go to a designated spot like west, where they're going to get blasted with a laser. This laser gives a 20-second bleed that's kind of spicy, and any other player that happens to get clipped will also take the damage and get the bleed, so just move away from the group to minimize the damage. As soon as you've pushed the boss to 89%, you're going to see Zurvan say, "The fires of anger roar and howl," and you've entered the Soar phase of the fight. This phase continues until you push the boss below 74%, which both on launch and with min-eye level no echo, you can skip entirely, just from the damage in the first phase. But whether or not that'll be the case or not on Unreal, you'll have to wait and see. There's more metal cutter autos, specifically 3 metal cutters are going to hit the main tank before the boss starts to cast Soar. Soar will have the boss dash off with clones in 3 directions, and there's only 2 patterns we need to worry about. Either way, start to dodge these AoEs as you see them while moving towards your clock position. For this pattern that you've just seen, the bosses will always be in a nice little triangle like this, and this is the AoE pattern that they're going to have when they dive. This won't be visible immediately, it's only visible a second before the attack goes off. I'm just showing you this so you can see the safe spots, which are tanks and DPS are basically on their clock spot, with DPS having to slide a little bit closer towards the east-west line to be able to be safe. Healers, doesn't matter where you go. Healers can go wherever, they just need to be stacked with 1 player. The idea is that all tanks and DPS are going to get these giant defamation AoEs, and so they need to be in their own safe spot. The bosses dash across, everybody gets hit by 1, and there's a puddle left behind, and now the healers get their mechanic. 1 healer gets a stack, the other healer gets a spread marker. Have the group stack with the healer that has a stack marker slightly north of middle, while the other healer just goes away from the stack. The second Soar pattern that you can see will look like this. Note the directions that those AoEs go off in are fixed, so there will always be the one going straight at A and then the other 2 heading sort of in the southeast corner. Once again, sort of squish towards your clock positions, though this is a little bit tighter of a squeeze. This time, the AoE pattern at the end is going to look like this, so the arena is perfectly split into 2 halves, and you need your tanks and your DPS to kind of hug the back wall in that section. You can use the defamations to be able to kind of guide you as how far you need to go because it's tight. You basically just want to go outside of the middle player's AoE. Healers also need to make sure they're stacked snugly on one of the DPS or tanks so they only get hit by 1 and not 2 AoEs. If you want to make this a little bit less tight, you can have the tank stack. The damage doesn't kill, but it's not really necessary and it doesn't really help much. The AoEs go off, step out of the puddles, and once again, the player with the stack and everybody else are going to stack slightly north of middle, while the other player, the other healer, just goes out of mid. Now, the reason I have everyone stack slightly north of middle instead of exactly middle is after about one metal cutter, the boss is going to cast Demon's Claw. This is a heavy-hitting tank buster on the main tank that has a huge knockback, about half the arena. If the boss is perfectly middle, you need to be pixel perfect or you're going into the wall and dying. So if you have the boss naturally just already off of middle, it's a little bit easier. If not, if the stack's mid, just make sure the main tank pulls the boss out of mid immediately. Again, if you push the boss below 74%, you will not see this, but it's there if you're still above that threshold. For this, have the main tank pop cooldowns and walk through the boss so that they're right in the middle, because the tank buster is going to knock them back, stun them, and put a vulnerability on them. The boss then casts Wave Cannon, and you need the entire party to stack in front of the tank to prevent them from dying. Whoever's the closest to the boss takes higher damage, so that needs to be the off tank. If instead you don't want to get the whole party involved, there's no other use for the invuln this early on, so what you can do is, when Demon's Claw gets cast, have your main tank move through, and when the cast bar is about here, pop your invuln. You'll get knocked back, you'll be stunned, the invuln will last 10 seconds, and therefore just long enough that the wave cannon will go off, and everybody can dodge it instead of joining it, so there's no mitigation, no healing here. Just make sure you're ready with a quick heal for the tank, as 2 seconds afterwards their invuln will fall off. When you finally get the boss below 74%, he'll stop doing soars, and instead say, "My sorrows chill doth all become ice," and we enter the icy phase. The boss will drop an ice puddle underneath them that anybody in it is being slowed when they're in it, so you basically don't want to go through that. There's going to be more metal cutter AoEs, and then the boss will cast Biting Halberd and turn towards a random player. I recommend having the whole group stacked south before this goes off, so that 99% of the time the boss will just turn south, and everyone knows when they see Biting Halberd, they run to north. Run around the icy circle so you don't get slowed. And note, this is a deceptive AoE marker. If you look at what it looks like in game, it looks smaller of a safe spot than it is. It is a perfect 270, so just as long as you're between 1 and 4, you're fine. Afterwards, the boss will cast Southern Cross. This is going to drop icy puddles that will explode immediately after the cast bar finishes. Wait till it finishes, start to move away from there, and about a second later, pop, there come the icy puddles. These persist for a short amount of time, but they hit pretty heavily if you're still stuck in one, so try to bait these together. There's more metal cutter autos, and then the boss is going to cast one of 3 mechanics. This next mechanic is somewhat random. If they cast Tail End, it is an out. You can use the orange symbols on the ground to know how far you need to go out. Just behind them is perfectly safe. Cyclical is an in. It's fairly generous, so just be roughly inside the hitbox near the boss and you're going to be fine. And finally, Biting Halberd. Biting Halberd is just what we've seen before, so I'm not going to show it again. After this mechanic goes off, the boss is going to jump away and we start our ad phase. There's a limit break bar that you have, and you need to kill all the ads before it builds up to 100, which should not be a concern, as there's plenty of time. It's more about just solving the ad phase mechanics correctly. The first phase has 1 Execrated Will, and 4 of these smaller Execrated Thews. The Thews, there's nothing to them, just have a tank grab them and kill them. The Will hits harder, so you want to make sure a tank has aggro on it, and after a couple of seconds, it will Berserk, which gives it a damage up, so it hits even harder. So focus these down first. Group them all together, have a tank take aggro, and kill them. For the second wave, you're going to get 2 of those Execrated Wills over in the west, so have each tank pick up 1, or 1 tank pick up both, and lots of cooldowns. There's an Execrated Wit over in the right. This is casting Mericidian Meteor. Sorry if I mispronounced that. This is an Enrage. You need to kill the boss before it casts that, because if the ad manages to cast it, it will kill everyone. This ad is also dropping these little puddles, but they're just AoEs, so don't stand in them. Finally, the Execrated While in the bottom is, at the beginning, going to start to cast a gaze mechanic, so just avoid looking at it until you see that go off. Drag everything together, nothing cleaves here. Start to do some AoE damage, but focus down the wit. Wait for the gaze to go off, and now you can drag him on top. The While's not going to do anything other than some really weak autos on whoever it has aggro on. Kill all 3 of them, focusing on the Wills, and then the While, and then you're on to the final phase of ads. For this final wave, you get 3 Thews in the east, have a tank pick them up. A Will in the south, have a tank pick it up. a Wit in the west, casting Meteor again, and a While in the north, doing a Gaze. Avoid the puddles, stack all the enemies on top of the Wit, kill the Wit immediately while avoiding the While's Gaze, wait for the Gaze to go off to go move towards the While, drag everything together, and kill them. When all of this is done, the boss is going to prepare an ultimate attack. Pop your mitigations before you get stunned. There's a few seconds to be able to throw on some persistent mitigations here before you all get frozen and the boss dashes through. When this final phase begins, Glowy Zurvan's going to land down, and your main tank needs to move north while everybody else moves south, as there's going to be autos pretty soon in, and it's the same cleaving metal cutters. Now, this final phase is really all about one mechanic, Broken Seal. Very early on, everybody is going to get either an infinite fire or infinite ice debuff, and tethered to a player of the same debuff. If you move too far away, roughly max melee to max melee on the other side of the boss, that tether will turn purple, and you're going to have a much more intense dot. If you're not stretched, there's still a dot, but it's so light that you barely notice it. Make sure that you stay close together with your partner, because if at any point in time you're too far away, this will likely lead to deaths. And the entire idea about these debuffs is these towers. There's 3 different patterns that can appear, and given that we've got 4 players with fire, 4 players with ice, we need to soak them with the matching color. So our fire players need to go in red towers, the ice players need to go in blue towers. The tricky bit is making sure that we get everybody going to the correct set of towers and not too far away from their partner. Here's how to do this. First off, all of these towers become simple as long as there is a red pair and a blue pair on the east and on the west. So let me show you the 3 different tower setups. The first one looks like this, like D-pad and face buttons on a PlayStation controller. If you're east and west, it's pretty simple. You're already next to a set of towers, so just move and make sure that you're 1 per. There doesn't need to be a priority system, just sort of YOLO who's going to go in which one, but make sure you're matching colors, and there's tons of time to adjust. About halfway through the meteors dropping down, the boss will start to cast Biting Halberd and face a random player, so at the very end of this, after we soak our towers, we need to rush behind the boss. Towers are soaked, and get behind the boss. The second set of towers looks like this, with 4 on the inside. Once again, if you've got your groups east and your groups west, it's really obvious who goes where. You go to the set of towers on your side that matches your color. Halfway through the cast, this time the boss will always cast Tail End. So you're on inner towers, immediately after they land, rush to the outside of the arena. Careful about Tail End in particular, there's a knockback that will likely knock you into the wall and kill you. So definitely be careful and don't greet this one. The final set of towers is a little bit trickier. They're on the outside, and at first it might look a little bit harder to figure out who goes where if you're east or west, but you just need to basically imagine this line here. So if there is a tower that matches your color perfectly on your side, so perfectly east or perfectly west, go there. If not, you're looking north-south. Head to your towers. The boss will finish off by casting Cyclical. They'll always return to middle before casting this, so it's just after you take the outside towers, rush in. The tower setups that you get follow an order. The element of randomness is it is entirely random which of these 3 setups you will see first. But once you see one set, you know what the next set is and the set after that. It always goes PlayStation setup, the pattern you see in the north, to inner setup, to outer setup. Always. Also, the mechanic that follows them is also fixed. So the PlayStation setup always has the get behind, the inner tower setup always has the get out, and the outer tower setup always has the get in afterwards. Now let's take a look at how this phase actually flows chronologically. First, everybody gets their infinite ice and infinite fire. Totally random which debuff you get, and totally random who you're going to be tethered to, other than you will be tethered to someone with the same debuff. Make sure that your main tank is slightly inside the hitbox so that you won't stretch your tether automatically as soon as it appears. One player will be targeted with Wave Cannon. They should step to the side, and to make sure they don't stretch their tether, make sure everybody else is perfectly south and just outside of the hitbox. Again, watch out for that bleed. It's pretty spicy. Now, next up is turfing. This is a multi-hit tank buster. For the tank, just pop some cooldowns and make sure you don't stand near anyone because the last hit always cleaves. More importantly, this takes so long that this is a perfect time to try to set up ready to deal with the Broken Seal towers. What we're going to try to do is make sure that we have 4 players that are going to go east and 4 players that are going to go west. To do this, if you are tethered to the main tank, step east. Now, we also need a pair that's the opposite color of main tank to go east. How you decide this is totally up to your group. I've tried a prio system, but I honestly find that just winging it works best. Lots of time to be able to decide this. Everybody else, take one step to the west. You now have your east and your west group. Main tank will always join the east group, and the other 4 players will be the west group. Turfing will go off, and this hits the main tank 5 times of just non-cleaving hits that hit quite hard, and then a 6th one, a fire 3 that does cleave. Note that every time that this gets cast, the boss adds 1 more physical hit to it, so the longer this fight goes on, the harder this is as both a mitigation and a heal check. After Turfing is cast, the boss is going to cast Southern Cross, and the most important person to move here is the main tank. They need to join the rest of the group south. Whether or not you stay just in your left-right groups or all stack south, it's totally up to your group, but be aware that when this finishes casting, everybody should move out of south. Make sure that your main tank is away from the rest of the group, because this is followed by a Metal Cutter auto. You don't want to cleave the rest of the group. After this, the boss will cast Broken Seal, and we get our first set of towers. Just like I showed, you should already be in east and west groups, so go to the nearest set of tower, make sure 1 player per tower, and that you're matching colors. Be aware, if you died before this and are revived, you will not have a debuff. You can still soak a tower, it will kill you, but it saves the group from getting the massive damage and might save the run, so it's still worth doing. After the set of towers here, it's a Biting Halberd always, so the group soaks their towers and immediately gets behind. Then, have the main tank face forward again for a Wave Cutter auto, before everybody gets another set of Infinite Fire and Infinite Ice debuffs. These will once again be totally random, as will who you're tethered to, and they will not be the same as the first set, so you need to look and follow the exact same system that we discussed earlier. This is then going to follow what I call the Broken Seal combo. You get another Wave Cannon, another Turfing, another Southern Cross, and another Broken Seal. Exactly the same, deal with it the same way that I just showed. When you've done 2 Broken Seal combos, the boss will cast Soar. This is the same as I showed earlier in the fight. Simply head towards your clock spots, dodge the original AoEs, make sure you're spread out, and have your healer with the stack marker go slightly north of middle. Make sure the other healer goes away. Unlike the first set of swords where there's Wave Cutters and some time, this one's pretty quickly followed by Demon's Claw, which is why it's quite important that you drop the stack outside of middle, otherwise your main tank has to hustle to get the boss to no longer be mid. Pop cooldowns, get knocked back, and have the group stack in front of them. Remember to make sure your off tank is the closest person to the boss so that they take the greater hit of damage. That's everything you're going to see. From here on out, everything just repeats. You get 2 of the Broken Seal combo in its entirety, and you get a Soar. And the boss will continue doing this until you hit its Enrage. At about 11.5 minutes, the boss is going to do a very slow cast of Flame Halberd, which serves as the Enrage. You have until the end of the cast to kill the boss, or every player is going to simultaneously get a giant Flaming Halberd dropped on them, and that's it. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this useful. Let me know in the comment section if you've got any additional tips or other ways to make this easier, or if you've got a better system for how to get your players split for Broken Seal. I'd love to hear it. Thanks so much, guys. Take care.